think you're conflict avoidant? Do you believe you're conflict avoidant? Have you ever thought to yourself, oh, this sounds like conflict, I'm not really good at it? Or maybe you're thinking that you're a fairly candid person and you can really have a conversation that addresses the conflict head on, but then somehow the outcome is either someone leaves or you tell someone to leave. And somehow you're in the same sort of prison, whether you are avoidant of conflict or rather confrontational, that it lands up with an outcome that keeps you in a type of private practice prison. Well, in today's episode, I'm going to help you figure out how you can look at the actual conflict that you're having, figure out which quadrant it lies in, and then figure out what your best line of action is. Very often, without these sorts of diagnostics, we may run away or head into conflict without any success. I'm Valerie Ling, and I'm here to help you figure out how to get out of private practice leadership prison to private practice leadership freedom. Conflict is such a loaded word. Depending on where you come from, the type of family you've grown up in, the sort of training that you've had, conflict can mean a variety of things. At the most severe end of the scale, conflict could mean war-like situation, relationships just exploding, people getting wounded and hurt, like casualties of war. That is one level of conflict. Right down the other end, if you're somebody who's potentially being trained in a profession that has conflict that is part of conversation, it's seen as part of the adversity scale. Perhaps you've had debating experience, or you've come from a family history or a work history where it was fairly normal to disagree. You might see conflict as being basically disagreements, right, with very little emotional upheaval or consequences. And somewhere in between those two is where maybe most of us lie, not quite understanding what type of conflict we're experiencing, but then believing that all conflict is bad and we should avoid it at all costs. Or you go the other end, which is to say, oh my gosh, I can't be conflict avoidant, so now I've got to be conflict confronting. And that can have some really horrible consequences as well. Put it this way, without any kind of adversity, we don't learn and we don't grow. If you didn't fall down and if you didn't pick yourself up from falling off a bike, dust yourself off, figure out where you went wrong, try again, you wouldn't grow. And conflict is the same thing. It is a form of adversity that helps us to learn and helps us to grow. Like at the very end of that spectrum where it's warlike, is very different from most of the conflict we are going to experience in our teams. The difficulty I think we have is we haven't actually been given the tools and the frameworks to put conflict on the table, turn it around, investigate it, look at it in all corners and decide what type of conflict do we have and what is our approach to dealing with this conflict. So I'd love to share with you a framework that we have found really helpful in our team and in our leadership team when we are looking at conflict. The first thing is we want to understand whether the conflict is an intrapersonal thing. Intrapersonal basically means that there is something going on in the individual. They're not happy and it's resulting in conflict with people. Now, if that is the case, you've basically got two broad investigations, if you like, or queries, line of queries. If there's something not quite right with the person, and basically you're seeing things like, coming late to work, rolling eyes in meetings, or, just going AWOL, ghosting, something might be going on in the person. There's broadly 2 lines of conversation we can have at that point. One is a well-being check-in. The first line of contact is to say, hey, I just wondered how you were going. When you're doing this, it genuinely, from a point of view where you're not threatened by conflict and you've looked at it objectively and gone, okay, this situation, there's only 2 possibilities. One is it could be a well-being situation. You invite the person to a series of authentic, genuine conversation, and you must listen. Don't fix anything, don't solve anything. Just try to understand, right, what's been going on for you. My gosh, these meetings, they just take too long. They're a waste of time. Okay, tell me a little bit more about what's happening for you that, is leading you to feel like, oh, it's such a rush in the morning. I've got to drop the kids off and then I've got to come here and it's so insensitive, right? And you go, oh, you're dropping the kids off. Tell me a little bit more about that. So you're doing a well-being check-in is one line of direction that you have. Another line of direction, if someone is really experiencing an intrapersonal conflict within your environment, is to really do a check-in as to whether they know what their role is. Are they feeling frustrated with their role, or are they feeling like they're just not able to do their job? And sometimes what you might hear from there is that there's been some kind of a change in the job or the change in the role or a perceived inadequacy that's causing them to feel frustrated, and they may not have realized that it wasn't that obvious to you that there was this change or this gap. Now, in that line of inquiry, if you like, just, finding out what's going on with the person, there could be a development conversation, or there could be a kind of training conversation, or even a work role conversation. So number 1 is ask yourself, this thing that you and I are experiencing, is it intrapersonal? Is it something that you're really inherently unhappy with? Then the next question is it interpersonal? The conflict that we're observing, is it something that there are 2 people just kind of at loggerheads with one another? So is it you and me? Or are we observing that there is, kind of a biting or a email exchange that you're noticing that basically is involving 2 people? If you're noticing that it is interpersonal conflict, well, again, you have 2 points that you can go to with, again, this line of inquiry. If it's interpersonal conflict, then you might want to ask and inquire, what is it? You wouldn't do this to 2 of them. Separate up, or even if it's you and me. I'm noticing that when you and I have a conversation, it tends to end with us like a just gridlocked. What do you think's happening? What could be it? And if you start to hear personal feedback, you're micromanaging, or you never give me a chance, you don't tend to listen, your job as a leader is not to react. All data, all information that you get, even if it's like, is still part of our leadership responsibility to be open-minded, open-handed, open-hearted to listen. You just have to listen. If it comes across that it is a personal thing, we might then summarize to say, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm just going to take some time to pause to really think. But if I've heard you correctly, what you're saying is you're starting to feel like I'm micromanaging you and I'm not trusting you. Is that right? Okay, how about we schedule another conversation? Let me reflect and think about it. Now, in that gap, you might ask for more information. You might ask for other people, hey, so what are you noticing? And I've literally done this, genuinely done this in my business with team members I've worked with longer. I'll ask, and I won't say who gave me feedback. It's like, I'm starting to get a sense that I might be perceived as being micromanaging. Can you help me to understand what that might be about? And then you'll get this information and go, oh, right. Now, it could be that your interpersonal conflict is professional. There's some kind of standards that aren't being aligned, or there's a perceived credibility or competency or integrity issue that's going on, or an ethical issue, which is very common in my profession. Now, again, I've noticed that when we talk about clients, that there's a push and a pull and a tug in our conversations when it comes to assessment. can you help me to understand where you think this might be or what might be the reason for this, right? And genuinely, I find that when I open this up, most of the time for me, I'm a very action-orientated person. And so when I'm doing therapy as a psychologist, I have learned to build a rapport with my clients that are quite action-orientated in my personality. But that doesn't mean that I bulldoze, right? It's just I've learned to make peace with my personality and to be authentic in the room. But not all of our team members may understand that. And so, what is that professional? And sometimes it might be that, I just don't agree with the way that you've conceptualized that client, or I just don't agree. It's that could be a professional. So again, I'd always suggest, okay, so what I'm hearing, let's take a pause. What I'm hearing from you is that you're starting to feel like the way that we are treating clients, the way that I'm treating clients is actually quite pushy or salesy. Is that right? Okay. I'll need to think about that. And again, think about that, pause, go get feedback, blah, 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 schedule for the next conversation. So we've got intrapersonal, we've got interpersonal. Now, the next level we go to is there might be group conflict, right? This is where you're going, what's happening? Maybe your administrative team is starting to be really kind of unkind in the way that they talk about your practitioners or vice versa. Maybe there are some group tensions happening in the business. Or maybe it's between, your virtual assistant service and your front desk. What is this? So again, it's asking the question, okay, is it I think this is a group situation. Now, essentially, when you have a group tussle, right, there's only a couple of things this could be about. Number one, there hasn't been an understanding or a mutual respect for each other's roles and functions in the business. So you can find out whether it's about that. Number two, they may not know what each other's roles and functions are, so they're stepping on one another's toes. Or it could be a real tussle of resourcing, feeling like they've got to really advocate. So, with healthcare professionals, they are advocates, right? So it's like, I've got to advocate for, the parents who are paying for the sessions. No, you've got to, that was the child who needs it. Right. So that's where very often the passions, the processes, the policies, just need to come up as a conversation between a change of perspective. Group one, what's important here for you? Group two, what's important for you? What do we have in common? Let's start there, right? That's group conflict. Finally, you may be in a situation where all guns are firing. This person is unhappy. These two people are unhappy. These groups are unhappy, and they're unhappy with you. You probably got a systems issue. Something systemic is happening here, right? If there's and again, we don't need to be threatened by it. In fact, we should rejoice for this, because any kind of adversity gives us an opportunity to have a look as a leader to say, what is happening in my team that is contributing to this? And because you have the ability, hopefully, to be resourced and to gain perspective, you can pull back and have a look at the final level of conflict. Is this a systems conflict? And I'll be talking about systems conflict in the next video if you want to tune in. But briefly, systems conflict can be basically about culture or confusion. If it's a culture issue, there's something going on in your whole system that is causing, chaos and disconnectedness and unhappiness within the environment. Or it could actually be a confusion issue, which is there are some sorts of communication gaps or processes. I remember one time, when we were trying to we made a change to be quite compliant with some HR processes, and the way that we rolled out those processes caused it was multiple points of unhappiness. And so when I got that feedback, it was like, this is a systems thing, because it's multiple points coming back at you saying something's not right. Now, if I took a dictator approach, I would have said, comply, comply, comply. Too bad, folks. Thankfully, I'd had enough resources in my system to actually pull back and say, what's different? Haha, we've had a systems change, right? I'm getting feedback that says that there's been a systems change, and we just need, and again, we got that feedback. What would help, in the future? And we documented that as a process for in the future, learning from how we did that. And once we cleared that up, it affirmed to, I think, to the team that they were heard. Even they didn't know what the issue was, right? Because, when you have like a HR compliance change and people are unhappy, all kinds of things can go in people's heads. They may think that it's their fault. We're actually sending a subversive message to say there's something wrong with you. Or we may be saying that we're tightening up, we are compliance driven now. We are the dictators coming through. That could, who knows? We don't know. And so when we address it and when we simply say, I've had to think about it, I've heard your feedback, I think this is a systems issue. Let me think about it. Let me get feedback from you guys to figure out how we can do this better. All of that just comes back down to a baseline where people can go, it was a systems issue. And what happens is the next time you're feeling disgruntled, there's a thought that goes in our team members' mind that says, I wonder if this is a systems issue. Am I the only one? And then we flip into inquiry and curiosity. So, intrapersonal, interpersonal, group, or systems conflict, if you're experiencing something in your private practice at the moment, in your leadership, just go through those levels, figure out where it is. I'd love to know what you think. Send me a comment. Let me know what you thought. If you have a question, very happy to answer it as well. And if, as you're listening to this, you're starting to think, oh my word, I don't feel very resourced at all to work through all of this. Well, I actually have a burnout prevention program called Resource Me that you can look at for yourself. It is part of my burnout prevention work that I do. And the course actually starts August 25th. If you're listening to this on replay, this is August 25th, 2022. And you can sign up and the link will be in the description.